My name is Christopher Peter and welcome to my podcast, The Christopher Peter Review, where I provide an economic perspective on the salient issues that impact our economy, society, and our world. I truly believe that America is a great nation because there are people that will do what they believe is right to make sure that we are exceptional. Where there are economic challenges, people will innovate and create new opportunities to help turn the tide. Where there is social injustice, people will stand up for the impacted communities. Where there is a moral decline, people will say enough is enough and seek to restore morality lost. America will not lose its way completely because we have great people. In this podcast episode, I am going to discuss how the people have saved our institutions and why free market capitalism is beneficial to our society. I will discuss our economy with a balanced perspective. Finally, I will discuss ideology and why I am not a big fan of rigid ideology one way or the other. Let us begin another episode of the Christopher Peter Review. More often than not, the innovation, ingenuity, ambition, and drive of the American people is what saves our society when it appears that all hope is lost. More often than not, the success that politicians claim in their re-election bids are actually the results of people who make lemonade when public policy creates only lemons. I recall back in 2011 when the Obama administration ended NASA launches, there was a feeling like America lost something special. Indeed, we did lose something special momentarily. A temporary setback that our private sector would eventually resolve. In reality, the space program was too expensive for the federal government to operate as business as usual. Imagine the financial burden today, where we are in a much more fiscally challenging state as a society. Space exploration is important, but the cost of launches was not in the budget. Now, there are more companies that are taking up space exploration, following suit of Elon Musk's SpaceX. Private sector companies that fill the gap in a more efficient and taxpayer-friendly manner. The beauty of having a nation with a free market capitalist economy. America is a nation built on being a society for the people, of the people, and by the people. It makes sense to have an economy that is centered around the people. Built by the hard work ethic from the people. Growing through the ambition and ingenuity of the people. And elevating society through the innovation of our great people. The innovation from our people helps fill the gaps that the government has because of the naturally inefficiency in public sector endeavors. There are limitations of government that are not necessarily present for private sector companies. For instance, private sector companies have the ability to fundraise external to tax hikes and fee increases. So, if the people in power do not prioritize some time as vital in society, entrepreneurs and investors have the ability to let the consumers decide if society truly wants that endeavor to be economically viable. Sure, the market is not perfect, but it expands opportunity that is generally missed out in non-free market economic systems. The free market and private enterprise aspect of the American economy is what makes our economic system so dynamic. Despite the best flawed arguments progressives can make, there is no arguing that free markets expand opportunity and elevate people better than the government could do. Especially when political discourse does not really seek to uplift the broadest population but select groups. Again, free market capitalism is not perfect, but those imperfections can be blunted with proper regulation. Yes, regulation is needed. But I will make an argument for better approaches to regulation or to how we maintain regulation in future content. Some conservatives may feel like every regulation needs to be removed, but many Republican icons have seen the importance of ensuring that companies behave in accordance with all stakeholders, not just the stockholders. There are people who oppose free markets because of manufactured anger generated by those on the left. Some feel like capitalism is oppressive, while socialism is not. There is a big difference in being structurally coerced into a line of work because the government only approves certain endeavors versus a person pursuing a field of their choosing, accepting the salary offer, and then becoming disgruntled about it later. At least in a free market capitalist system, that person can market their skill set to increase their income. I have heard people who wear progressivism as a badge of honor not fully understand how the economy works. For instance, some believe that having a large population will make areas more affluent than other areas. Not in itself. China has a big population, but it was not until they engaged with the West and learned to market their best economic asset, a vast amount of cheap labor, did they experience an economic boom that fueled and uplifted their quality of life that is still not as great across the whole nation. See, markets allow you to take what you have an abundance of and exchange it for something that another has an abundance of or for an agreed upon value. If you have a large population, but that population is highly unskilled or does not offer anything to offer for exchange of value, then it simply will be reliant on the generosity of others. You may not like the going rate for these exchanges, but those rates improve as the quality and reliability improve. We have discussed in past episodes that skill sets that are more readily available will be less valuable than fields with less replaceable talent. If there are 10 other people who could do your job, then at some point one of those 10 may get your job. We have become accustomed to bad economic policy where the focus is increasing the cost of low-skilled labor, manipulating the market in the belief that we are helping people. In the short term, maybe we were. But not over the long haul. The typical result is that this labor is moved overseas or replaced by technology, so the need for this labor is diminished. Many might not have noticed that right after the automakers completed the recent deals with unions, many have announced layoffs or reductions in future hires. This is a problem regardless of economic systems. Many socialist nations see job shortages turn into social unrest or mass migrations fleeing. At least our markets are able to disrupt and transform the labor markets at times. I believe that it is important that we value the opportunities that come with free market capitalism and understand that some level of regulation will be needed to blunt the impact of the negatives. Regulation is not a panacea and can be the cause of the market issues and troubles. But we as a society must always seek sustainable opportunities. Not just ones made to appease a temporary superficial need. But solve economic challenges that can provide long-term viability. There is some optimism around the state of the economy, despite the overall gloomy outlook many in the general public have on the subject. A major driver of this optimism is the performance of the financial markets, which have set record highs. Also, the rate of growth for inflation has reduced closer to the long-term goal for the Federal Reserve. But, does the economy truly feel like it is on stable ground? I would define a good economic environment as one where at the very least private sector jobs are growing, financial markets are generating wealth, cost of living is becoming more affordable, and there is growth in income mobility. And that these are generally being seen across communities and all groups. Basically, the economy is giving confidence to people to invest their time and money. Those investments are growing wealth for both the investor and the organization, and the economic activity is positively impacting society as a whole. The financial markets are on a high right now. Generally, the stock market is a good indicator of where the economy is headed, but it cannot be taken in isolation of other data. First, the growth in the markets is still driven by a handful of companies, not really an expansive growth. The Magnificent Seven stocks are generating growth because these companies are always on the brink of monetizing artificial intelligence. Having a desirable and game-changing technology will always drive value. But many other companies are still somewhat flat or slight growth in the quarter that included the holiday season. In the midst of the positive narrative, one commentator pushed back on the afternoon business shows that we need to not overreact to what we are seeing. He pointed out that much of the positives were in the backdrop of a really negative point at which the quarter started. Then the market gained its footing and the last quarter was salvaged. In October, there was a notable drop in the market, surrounded by concerns over the federal budget situation and the impact of rate increases. But the holiday season is generally good for the economy. Families still need their Christmas and Hanukkah gifts. One interesting aspect in many earnings releases was not just how the companies performed against expectations, but the information bundled with the announcements. Many companies that announced positive earnings against expectations also noted that they intended to trim staffing levels due to either bloated recruitment during the pandemic that did not provide the intended value or trying to extract value in the coming year. That signals that there is a somewhat lower level of confidence in the upcoming year. Some of that pessimism might be associated with our geopolitical issues and the fact we are headed into a contentious presidential election cycle. The rate at which inflation is growing is slowing, closer to the traditional target the Federal Reserve prefers. But, there are still challenges ahead, as many supply chains are still experiencing upward pricing pressure and supply challenges. Inflation always changes, but how it changes in relation to wage growth is an important metric. If one checks recent job postings in many of our big cities, they will see that the listed compensation for many positions has dropped considerably for many companies. It appears that companies are rethinking the salary offers as well as how many people they want to bring in. Not surprising that we are seeing a slowing in the number of people resigning each month. People generally alter behaviors when there is a known risk in an environment. Like when you hear your GPS say there is a speed trap in the area, you are more likely to slow down. The changing market dynamics is making people hold off from separating from their jobs until they have a new one in place. Not the greatest time to just frivolously quit in an emotional outburst. Even the most spontaneous person will be more cautious in an environment they deem less advantageous to them at the moment. While there is a narrative being pushed that we have achieved a soft landing, which might very well be the case, we must also be cautious that the near future might still be challenging. There is an obsession over a rate cut by the Federal Reserve, which is usually a tool used to stimulate an underperforming economy heading towards a recession. The Federal Reserve will probably show great caution before they make a cut. We needed to rein in economic activity that was fueling inflation to help balance supply with available demand. Making a quick U-turn might have negative impacts. The recent notes after the meeting is that a rate cut may come fairly soon. Maybe the economy might need some level of stimulus. But the Fed does seem poised to not lose focus on the main objective. Fight inflation. Minimize economic harm. But layoffs in certain industries may be inevitable. So how is the economy doing? The right answer always is it depends. There are positive signs and warning signs at the same time. Seems like the consensus is happy with where we are now, considering there was fear of a more dire situation. But avoiding the worst case scenario should not be our best case scenario. Still many issues that need to be addressed. As I have said in past episodes, I am not the biggest advocate for any specific political ideology. I do think the principles people demonstrate are important, their value system matters, and, more importantly, their consistency in both validates whether others can trust them. Nothing worse than someone who says one thing and will do the exact opposite when convenient for them. At times, we have to determine which of our principles supersedes other ones at the moment, which may create conflicts, but the problem is when the compromise is simply for their own benefit. Why would I then take them seriously? I will discuss more on this in a minute. I think effective leaders are ones who do what is right for society in the manner that has the best probability for success and the most efficient approach. That is important. Because we want leaders who can deliver the greatest good for the greatest number of people, and to do that they must truly understand what that good is and how to best create it. Efficiency matters because it preserves resources to provide that good for more people. Despite our ideological and demographic differences, I believe Americans have many things in common and share similar interests. Our differences are how to pursue those shared interests and what constraints or realities we perceive to exist. Our similar needs generally stem from our human nature and biological requirements. Our differences generally emanate from our ideological leanings that evolve from our environment, education quality, cultural values, and experiences. I believe deep down inside, we all want to live in a society that is safe from threats, foreign and domestic. We just differ on how to achieve that end, how to define the end goal, and what limits need to exist. We all want to breathe in clean air, drink clean water, and reside in clean communities. We believe that we could do that and improve our quality of life and advance past the current boundaries of human achievement. We all want to experience economic advancement, wealth growth, financial independence, and self-reliance to some degree. Some just place responsibility external to the beneficiary, while many others believe people make their own outcomes. We want people to matter regardless of their demographics. Some feel like others need to validate their existence, and many feel like just enjoy the freedom to live a life of your choosing without making them responsible for it. I know that seems like an oversimplification. If this is true, then why are we so divided as a society? Why do progressives hold such strong animosity for conservatives? Why do conservatives hold progressives in such low regard? I believe it is largely because of our political environment and culture, where people succeed by creating divisions and then connecting with those groups. Using marketing strategies that allow candidates to segment the market and find ones that they can coalesce to achieve their goal of gaining power. For instance, if you want to start a restaurant, you have to first understand that you will never appeal to everyone in the world. So, you need to find a group of prospective customers that will more likely than not find what you are good at creating appealing. So if you are a master at making delicious burgers, you are going to target first burger lovers, and then maybe the next target would be sandwich lovers. You may not want to target the market of people who do not like to eat with their hands. They are not people who would generally find a burger appealing. Now, to keep them coming back and wanting to remain loyal, you have to make them feel like being a customer of your burger restaurant aspirational. Like creating a false sense of superiority in some manner because they choose your restaurant. No one buys an electric car because they like them. They want one because they feel like owning one gives them moral superiority in regard to environmental issues. When the reality is the gasoline is simply burned elsewhere. But they do not need to know that part. Same thing in politics. You love your country if you vote for conservatives. You care about people if you vote progressive. In reality, if you love your country, then you love the people in it. If you care about people, you care about the people that reside in the same country as you. But politicians do not want to make that obvious. Nice segue back to what mentioned earlier about people being consistent with their espoused principles. Politicians have to segment the market of voters out using platforms that connect them based on ideological leanings and give them a reason to feel good about remaining in that ecosystem and with their decision. Nothing contradicts that more than when you are inspired by someone who claims to hold these principles that you also hold, to live this life that you found appealing, And to pursue policies that you believe are the right path forward than to do the exact opposite or find out that those were just words on a campaign trail. Now, I do not expect people to be perfect examples of what they say they believe. But they must be consistent more times than not. Or at the very least can demonstrate why the compromise was the best path forward. Sometimes, we may be in situations where what we truly believe is not the best choice. Sometimes, we have to accommodate the situational factors at hand. For instance, in my experience with procurement, our general dogma was that saving money and creating value was the core of our existence, but at times we had to set aside that in order to accept that gaining access to a product that is needed trumped the need to reduce cost. So we focused on trying to get the best deal that still secured us the good or service. In that organization, many of us felt that while the leaders spoke about the need to create value, they certainly did not reward that. Many times those who were close in relations to certain members in management were rewarded. Not a family-owned company, by the way. So, while they espoused one set of values, they demonstrated that nepotism was more valuable to them. People do not like when you give off a false sense of expectation and are really disappointed in the fact that they believed you. Now, of course, political opposition will always create the narrative that there is a gap between your promises and achievements, when the realities bear that as fact then you will have voters' remorse. But was it that the ideology did not meet the needs of the moment, or was the person not truly a representative of the ideological group? Now, keep in mind that I believe most people are not homogeneous in their ideological leanings when you consider various topics or issues. Personally, I tend to be somewhat conservative on fiscal and security issues. More moderate on social issues. Based on the political tests I have taken, and there are plenty available online, I tend to fail into the category of center-right. Again, I do not consider myself an ideologue. But I do see that there is a growing number of people who see ideology as part of their identity. Some people want to identify with affiliations rather than what makes them the individual they are. Identify based on who they support, not what they do. When something like ideology becomes your identity, I think it is hard for that person to see beyond it. Therefore, every other ideology becomes the enemy that they cannot and will not relate to. And that is a major reason why we are so divided today. Now, let us bring Jennifer into our discussion.
I do believe that ideology in itself is not a bad thing. There are many people who find it useful to live by a personal code or guiding set of principles that helps them make sound decisions in life. Helps with situations where the answer is not always black and white. To some degree, we all have a set of principles or values that guide our choices, behaviors, and attitudes. We all have them. But the main focus today is political ideology and how our political principles and choices do not always align with what is best for our own households and communities. For instance, I believe many of us wonder who hold values and principles similar to our own vote differently than us. How these same people can behave politically than we expect them to be based on their personal value system. How can a church-attending Christian vote for an abortion-supporting Democratic candidate? How can a conservative be morally consistent in voting for a Republican like Donald Trump? How does our political ideology sometimes supersede our personal ideology?
There is a need for people to be consistent in certain aspects of life, whether they are being truly consistent overall. By that I mean we sometimes. But, in life, there are people who need to live by what they may prescribe as a personal code. Or a guide set of principles that helps them make sound decisions for their life. Many people may say they are anti-ideology, but I think we all have some guiding principles that we hold ourselves accountable to, which is essentially an ideology. That is not a bad thing. It could be a great thing for an individual. The issue is how well we tolerate opposing views or those who live their life using a different ideology. Some people view others holding opposing views on the world, on life, and on faith as an existential threat. So they decide that opponents must be silenced, deplatformed, or in the worst case scenario, eliminated. The hysteria that surrounds our domestic political environment and our global discourse is troubling. Once people focused on the similarities we have. But there are many people who no longer care about that. They only see the differences. And hear the narratives surrounding those differences. That is where the issues really arise from. The issues with ideology are also not really in what people believe in general. People are generally given the freedom to think what they want, do what they want, and support what they want as long as it does not harm others. The point of conflict when people who may view issues differently than you do have the opportunity to influence the way society will approach the particular issue. So, you may personally not have an issue with a person who is progressive or conservative. But if that individual has the ability to impact what rules you have to live by, what opportunities exist, and the quality of those, then you may have concerns. Rather than be rigid in our ideological views, we should be intellectually curious on what issues each may be more effective and what is the track record of politicians who hold a particular set of views. And that is the basis for our discussion on ideology. In this conversation, we are going to focus on progressive liberalism in America. I generally disagree with much of the progressive ideology. Not so much on the problems they raise, but the extent of those problems, the manner they defend them, and the solutions they advocate for. In some manners, I feel like the problems they raise are not top-of-page problems. The common defense of progressive policies is the use of political hysteria and petulance. And their solutions simply do not work. The best manner to evaluate any policy platform or ideology is looking at how well it works. The report card on progressive politics is currently not a very good one. There is an easy litmus test of whether an ideology is an effective governing philosophy. Are people flocking to areas where those ideas are? Or are they fleeing them by the masses? Many Americans are fleeing blue states, primarily ones run by Democrats who associate themselves with progressive liberalism. Enough people left the states of California and New York that both states saw their congressional representation decrease, which also will reduce their electoral votes. On the contrary, red states like Florida and Texas saw an influx of businesses and residents as they are states regarded as more free and easier to operate a business in. They also offer lower costs of living and better school systems. There always is a worry that this could lead to political shifts in the new states. But there also were shifts in politics in the states these individuals left behind. For instance, New Jersey, a traditional blue state, saw the closest governor race in our modern history. New York also saw closer than expected elections throughout the traditionally reliable blue state. If you look at polling, people constantly feel like the nation is heading in the wrong direction. From a policy effectiveness standpoint, the progressive agenda does not deliver results that the public actually want. The communities that are dominated by progressive politicians are struggling with many problems stemming from the policies enacted by the people they elect. As we have stated in past episodes, results should matter in our politics.
The city of Philadelphia is one of America's greatest cities and used to be New York before New York City was a thing. It is one of our most historic cities. But now the city is one of the poorest big cities in America and the future does not look very bright. Right now the only things Philadelphians are hopeful about centers around their sports teams. And the city of brotherly love is not so loving right now. Based on the local issues with crime, we may need to set aside the love part and just start calling it the city of brotherly shove. I think at least for the rest of football season. And every football season after this one. The city is a Democrat safe haven that elects one progressive after another and is set to commit the same mistake again. Insanity is commonly defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Regardless of whether one is a Republican or Democrat, they need to earn the right to represent a district, not simply be a product of a political machine. Philly is a perfect example of this generational politics problem. People want to live in a city that offers hope and opportunity. Not cities that are set on a non-stop path of despair, decline, and crime. Experiencing record growth in the number of homeless is not something that a local government wants on their record. From a policy perspective, I think there is no doubt that the policy ideas of progressives do not yield the desired results. And are quite dangerous to the average person.
Speaking of danger, one of the biggest challenges that residents of these progressive strongholds have in common is the lack of public safety, the actual delivering of justice for the victims of the crimes committed to the person committing those crimes. Speaking of Philly, I am not a fan of Google Maps telling me they found a faster way that saves a few minutes when I am driving to or around Philadelphia. Largely, I find it annoying because it always takes me to places where I know carjackings are a common or more likely occurrence from my familiarity with those areas. It is not faster if I end up having to walk the rest of the way. I have the same issue in New York City. Ironically, I never get a message that we found a safer way. The crime in our major cities is a growing problem. In the past, crime was not as out in the open as it is nowadays. Even in the most notoriously dangerous cities, there were limits on crime. Criminals did not commit their crimes out in the open. It was done in the cover of night. Done out of sight of witnesses. Now, criminals are not afraid to commit crimes out in the open because of the misguided prosecutory decision by local district attorneys, who are trying to rebalance crime statistics to make it appear more friendly. But that approach does not lower crime, just lowers justice. Americans do not want to see manipulation of the crime data. They want to see actual reductions in the crimes that occur. And that is something that progressive district attorneys have continually failed to deliver. In the past, they have changed the way crimes are reported to give the appearance of less crime. Now, they selectively prosecute based on demographics. In some fanciful world that every group of people do the exact same crimes at the same rates for the same reason.
The issue with crime in our major cities is one part how the laws are enforced and what is done to prevent people from choosing crime as an acceptable behavior. How well does our public police divert people away from crime? I think we are on the same page in that the job of our prosecutors at the local, state, and federal level is to evaluate the evidence collected against the relevant statutes, file charges against the accused, and present a case in a manner to ensure justice is delivered for the victim. I do think diversion programs can be helpful for nonviolent petty crimes and help people change their ways before they commit a serious crime with no opportunity for turning back. But too many criminals are sent back to the streets because of misguided dogmas of district attorneys who think that it is their job to manipulate the race makeup of our crime stats. Social justice is blinding them from the civic duty to provide actual justice. Not surprising, people are leaving many cities. Not surprising, many businesses no longer find cities suitable for operations.
Many times problems stem from existing problems not properly addressed. Areas that are not safe are generally not well suited for economic activity and investment. Businesses do not want to risk property damage, high insurance rates, and safety risks for both their workers and customers if they can avoid it. People do not want to reside in places where their children cannot move around safely. Where people see the ills of the criminal element. Those who can afford it will abandon these areas for safer residences. And the usual response from the elected officials is questioning their economic patriotism. But the real question is why these politicians run for office, perform poorly at their job, and expect residents to just accept the results. As we discussed in the Doom Loop commentary, the downward spiral of many of these great cities are due largely to the rise in crime, homelessness, and deterioration of the communities. All the while, the elected officials deflected blame everywhere but the sources of the problems and the parties who were supposed to fix them. The economic problems go much farther than just the crime issues. Every policymaker should be pro-business because businesses employ people, entrepreneurs find innovations to solve gaps, and economic activity generates wealth and tax revenue. But progressives are generally anti-business and distrustful of corporations and business overall. While I do believe that businesses need to be properly regulated, the progressive left go too far in their regulation by attempting to manipulate competition and determine winners and losers through statutory decree.
There is a need to ensure that businesses are living up to societal expectations and are acting in the best interests of their customers, workers, investors, and other stakeholders. But policymakers should not look at businesses as the enemy of society. Especially when they are reliant on them to expand and hire to make them look good. Politicians do not create jobs. They never have and never will. What they do is help foster environments where people either feel comfortable in investing in new ideas or growth, or environments where people feel it is better to keep their money in a bank. When investors feel like their capital is better kept out of the economy, or businesses feel like their cash flow is better protected, not investing in new capital or employees, the economy will not grow.
I strongly feel that economic decisions should be made for economic reasons, not political reasons. For instance, there are times when tax cuts are needed and times when it can make sense to raise the tax rates. But it is generally understood that raising taxes is ill-advised during challenging economic times. Tax increases discourage economic activity. Politically, there are those who overlook the economic effects of tax increases. Some believe that tax increases serve the best interest of their respective communities despite taking money directly out of resident taxpayers' households. The public projects and service to select groups outweigh the impact to the overall group at large. The government should serve the interests of everyone in their communities. Not just the group that voted for you or a single demographic group. Sure, the government should find ways to care for the most vulnerable. But the job gets harder when you shrink the economy. Essentially, you cut off your nose to spite your face. You can do the same if you cut the tax rates too significantly and the increased economic activity is not taxed at a level to offset the lost revenues from the previous forecasts. This is why some make the flawed argument that tax cuts lead to deficits. While they may contribute, spending leads to deficits.
Divergent views on social principles, political issues, and economic realities can contribute to the strong levels of division that many complain about. The real issue resides in how we are able to bridge our differences. If we treat our ideologies as new religions, then we will never be able to construct workable solutions that can be considerate of needs of all sides. Compromise and negotiation are not bad outcomes. That is all the time we have for this conversation. But we will discuss ideology more over the upcoming months.
A big thank you to all of you in the audience. Your viewership is appreciated and valued. Please follow the Christopher Peter Review on social media and continue to visit www.crcreview.com for new episodes. Thank you once again. Until next time.